성공을 향해 가는 채널.
Now folks, these principles don't rely on you having money. They rely on the type of person that you are. That's something that you can act upon at any level of poverty or prosperity.
더글라스 크루거는 작가이자 연설가입니다. 당신을 가난하게 만드는 50가지 방법이라는 책을 썼죠. 그런 그가 빈곤한 상태에서 부자가 되는 방법을 알려준다 합니다. 지금부터 영상에서 알아봅시다.
Let's talk about how to overcome poverty and become wealthy in your lifetime. What do you do if, like so many millions of South Africans, you are facing grinding levels of poverty? You don't even have a basic entry-level job. How can you practically go about escaping poverty? Let's talk about what it feels like to find yourself in a situation like that. When you are facing grinding poverty, it feels like the walls are closing in around you, that there's just nothing you can do, nothing that you can act upon to start lifting yourself out of your situation. Well, folks, no matter how dark it may seem at the time, and no matter how you may feel like you have no options, there are always two things that you can and should do. And these two things can and will lift you out of poverty if you do them faithfully and long enough. So, let's talk about what they are. The first thing that you need to understand is that there are different ways of creating wealth.
진짜 극심한 빈곤한 상태에선 모두가 망연자실한 상태가 될 것입니다. 공부를 할 수도 없고 큰 돈을 벌 수도 없죠. 그럼에도 두 가지 원칙을 충실히 하면 성공할 수 있다 합니다.
Principle number one is this: raise your personal value. Raise your personal value. Now, when we think of that idea, the first thing we tend to think of is we think university degree. And again, tens of millions of South Africans simply don't have that option. I didn't have the option of studying full-time for a varsity degree. What I did personally was I worked a full-time day job and then I paid my own way to study through UNISA in the evenings. But now here's the interesting thing, folks. Having a university degree does not necessarily guarantee wealth. Don't get me wrong, it's a good step and it's a good idea. It is not a barrier to your wealth if you can't afford a formal education. Instead, we need to find other ways to raise our value. Now let's start at the very simplest levels. I mean, say for example that you can read but not very well. To raise your personal value, how about getting hold of some very basic books and teaching yourself to read a little bit better? And it's those skills, the soft skills, the human skills, things like your ability to read, to speak to a group of people, to put forward an idea, and especially to lead others. When you add those things to your own abilities, you are raising your personal value. Principle number two is this: repay trust with excellence. Repay trust with excellence. I like to think of this as what I call the Joseph principle. You've heard the story of Joseph, who had a bit of a rough start to life. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. And I mean, imagine a scenario like that. You are powerless, you are forced to work and so forth. Now, in Joseph's case, in two different scenarios, first as a slave in a household, and second in a prison, and then moving on to Pharaoh's kingdom. What he did every time was he repaid any small amount of trust that was shown in him with excellence. So let's take a very small example of this. Say that you managed to get a job as a cashier, or say, for example, that you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, or say that someone has allowed you to dig a hole in their backyard. Basic things. Our temptation at that level is to say, well, this doesn't matter that much, and to repay trust with a cavalier attitude, with arrogance, with sarcasm, heck, steal something while you're there. It's the worst thing you can possibly do. If you take the small amount of trust that is shown in you and you repay it with excellence, what happens is you're given a little bit more trust. Now I can allow you to do that work while I'm not watching you. And if I learn that in my absence you have once again repaid my small amount of trust with excellence, you've been an excellent steward of the small thing that I've given you to do, I can give you more. You will start to find, as you raise your personal value and as you repay trust with excellence, that it starts feeling like the world has handed you a few more levers when you raise your value and repay trust with excellence. Now, folks, these principles don't rely on you having money. They rely on the type of person that you are. And that's something that you can act upon at any level of poverty or prosperity.
지금 당신은 가난하다고 비관만 하고 있나요? 그럴 시간에 자신의 가치를 높일 방법을 찾으세요. 그리고 지금 하고 있는 일이 아무리 작은 일이라도 항상 최선을 다해 끝까지 해내세요. 그렇게 신뢰를 쌓게 되고 자신의 가치가 높아지면 어느 순간 부자가 될 수 있을 겁니다.